For weeks now, the leaders of the West and Russia have engaged in a war of words over the Ukraine conflict. There have been threats, counter-threats, provocations, and a series of diplomatic efforts. In the latest, Russia says it will insist that the NATO should publicly announce that it will not admit Ukraine into the alliance. While fears of a possible Russian invasion have only been mounting, with the West and the US in particular raising an alarm, Moscow claims that it is pulling back some of its troops from near Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry says some units were returning to their bases. Earlier today, Russia also announced that it had ended its military drills in Crimea. Russia's state television broadcast images of military units crossing a bridge, urging the Russian-controlled peninsula of Crimea to the mainland. But the US and its allies remain unimpressed and also unconvinced with Moscow's claims of withdrawal of troops in certain regions. In a nationally televised address, United States President Joe Biden says the danger is still clear and present.
Minister reported today that some military units are leaving their positions near Ukraine. That would be good, but we have not yet verified that. We have not yet verified the Russian military units are returning to their home bases. Indeed, our analysts indicate that they remain very much in a threatening position. And the fact remains, right now, Russia has more than 150,000 troops encircling Ukraine and Belarus and along Ukraine's border.
Not just that, he appealed to Vladimir Putin to step back from war with Ukraine, which would cause needless deaths and destruction. Joe Biden added that a Russian invasion was still very much a possibility. However, he said that diplomacy should be given every chance to succeed.
The United States is prepared no matter what happens. We are ready with diplomacy to be engaged in diplomacy with Russia and our allies and partners to improve stability and security in Europe as a whole. And we are ready to respond decisively to Russian attack on Ukraine, which is still very much a possibility. Yesterday, the Russian government publicly proposed to continue the diplomacy. I agree. We should give the diplomacy every chance to succeed.
NATO remains skeptical, saying it is yet to see any evidence of a de-escalation on the ground. In fact, the NATO defense ministers are holding a crucial meet in Brussels. The NATO Secretary General has said that he wanted to see stronger signals of reconciliation.
Ukraine is a sovereign country. It is making its own choices about its own future. But the Kremlin doesn't like this, and so it threatens war. And this is the essence of the current escalation. This is something we simply cannot accept. I think diplomacy has not yet spoken its last words, and we saw signs of hope yesterday, but now deeds have to follow those words.
What we haven't seen is evidence of withdrawal that has been claimed by the Kremlin. In fact, we've seen continued build-up of things like field hospitals and strategic weapon systems such as Iskander missiles deployed. So I think the reality is, I said last week when I visited Moscow, is that we'll take Russia at its word, but we'll judge them on their actions.
And for further perspectives, joining us on the broadcast is security analyst Dr. Peter Topichkanov from Moscow and political consultant Nicole Brenner-Schmitz from Washington. Thanks very much for being here with us. Nicole, let me come to you first. Sergei Lavrov says fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine have puzzled Moscow as it is returning more troops and weapons to the bases. What is your assessment of the Russian claims of de-escalation?
I think the United States is continuing its course of action that it's been since the very beginning of this potential conflict. It's calling for diplomacy. It is asking for that to be the process forward, but it is taking everything that is coming out of Moscow with a grain of salt. There is not a trust there that the words that are coming necessarily mean anything unless we see the actions back them up. So President Biden was very clear yesterday that while he heard what Moscow was saying, and we saw the images on their own TV, that we needed to see actual troops leaving these areas of Ukraine. They are still very much in a position where they can attack, and we need to see actual actions back these words up before the United States backs up at all.
Dr. Topichkinov, if the troops are returning, as Moscow claims was the plan all along, what has the Russian president, according to you, been able to achieve with this military buildup?
Well, first of all, it's at this stage, it's difficult to assess the status of these movements because we are discussing the movements of the troops in the Russian territory. According to the official point of view in Moscow, it's about just trainings inside Russia and also with the neighboring country of Belarus. So from this point of view, if today the Russian decision is to move these troops to their bases, tomorrow they will be moved to another part of the Russia or again closer to the border with Ukraine. So the situation is flexible. Meantime, the current tension over Ukraine between Russia and the United States and NATO attract the NATO and US attention to the Russian proposals of having a substantial dialogue on the security framework in Europe, including the draft treaty that Russia proposed last year about NATO, about security in Europe, about the joint responsibility for security between the countries living in the European part of the world.
Nicole, the American intelligence assessment had predicted the 16th of February, that's today, as the date of that attack. There were also varying figures, according to Western officials, of the number of troops that were stationed near Ukraine's borders. Do we at this point have clarity on the number of troops that continue to be stationed?
I think the United States has put out what they believe the number to be. I don't know that that's exactly the number. I'm not obviously in the intelligence room, so they've consistently said that there's over 100,000, and it's not just the amount of troops; it's where they are stationed. It is the fact that they are at key points that surrounds the country of Ukraine. I think that is of considerable concern to not just the United States, but its NATO allies, right? We've seen NATO stay in lockstep with this. Both the United States and the European leaders have come out as a strong, united force on this situation, and they are staying that way. And that might have been something that Mr. Putin had underestimated.
Let me take that to you, Dr. Topichkinov. What is the number of troops that we are talking about that are now returning to the bases?
So at this stage, I would avoid the concrete numbers because, in fact, it doesn't matter how many thousands or thousands more, thousands less Russia might have at the border with Ukraine. Because the question is, if there is a military escalation between Russia and Ukraine, Russia might strike the Ukrainian territory even without having thousands of troops near the border with Ukraine. Because Russia already demonstrated advanced capabilities, including in missile technologies, conventional missile technologies, that can strike any targets inside even deep territory of Ukraine. Also, Russia, due to the military reform, improved the mobility of its own armed forces. And the military campaign in Syria demonstrated that Russia is capable to move the troops quickly and to move the military infrastructure very quickly, even to the distant country of Syria. And now, when we project this situation to Ukraine, we can see that even without having a permanent representation of 1,000 troops near the border with Ukraine, Russia still if needed and if in Moscow is believed by the political and military leadership that it's needed, Russia might threaten Ukraine with military attack, even without having the troops at the border. That is why my main point is that this issue can be resolved only with a political dialogue between Russia and Ukraine, and also with some kind of consultations between Russia and NATO, Russia and the United States. And yesterday, statement by President Biden demonstrated that the United States is ready to talk to Moscow about Ukraine and about the security in Europe.
Well, Nicole, while Russia claims there is de-escalation on the ground, it also insists that NATO should publicly announce that it will not admit Ukraine into the alliance. What do you make of that?
Well, the United States and NATO has been clear that's an unacceptable demand on behalf of Russia, and not one that they are entertaining right now. So I don't think there's much to comment on it. The United States has been very clear that that's not a demand that they're going to meet, and it's unreasonable of Russia to demand it.
Right, we're leaving it there for the moment, Nicole and Topechkin. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.